Okay, so here I am doing one of those old-fashioned YouTube confessional type videos that nobody seems to do anymore. And why am I doing it? Because partly out of boredom, but also just to share a recent experience which brought up issues, shall we say. So recently, my video Almost Forgotten was part of a screening in Holland, and the curator of that screening sent those of us who had work in it a video trailer that included brief excerpts of all of our work. And so I watched it mainly just to see my own stuff, of course, and as I watched through it, it went through very quickly, and I was beginning to think that mine hadn't made the cut. And so when it finally did appear, I wasn't quite prepared to see it or hear it. And that's the important thing, because Almost Forgotten, for those of you who haven't seen it, relies on the narration. And so the brief excerpt that was included a little bit of narration. And so for a microsecond, I didn't realize it was my voice. And my reaction was, oh, that's a nice voice. And then, of course, I realized it was me. But why am I sharing this? Well, it was very gratifying because for a very brief moment, I heard my voice as other people hear me. I heard my voice, period. Now, not as it comes out of my body, of course, but the way other people hear it. And I have always been very self-conscious about my voice. And as my collaborators could tell you, I go to a lot of effort to do whatever I can to improve the sound of my voice. And those of you who are casual visitors here, you may have noticed that occasionally I will slip into fairly slushy S's. And that's sort of the key to all of this, because the reason I am so self-conscious about my voice is that when I was a kid, like around 10 years old, for reasons that were not clear at the time, I was taken out of my regular class to undergo speech therapy. It was a humiliating experience because out of nowhere, I was just taken out of class and had to undergo this therapy for several weeks. Now, I eventually learned that the reason was that the school had been encouraging the teachers to select students that they had any difficulty in understanding when they spoke. And because of my lisp, apparently my teacher had selected me for this help. Now, I resented it at the time, but I really resented it because in addition to just the humiliation of being pulled out of class like a miscreant, it happened that almost every time I had one of these sessions, it was at the same time that the art instructor was visiting the class. And I really enjoyed the art instruction, so that I was not only forced to leave the class, but I couldn't do some of the stuff that I really enjoyed doing. So one of the results of this was that in trying to help me with my S's, the therapist realized that because of the structure of my mouth, I simply could not do it. I cannot form an S the way most people do. And so she worked on providing me with other techniques to overcome that. And hopefully you will notice that I have a passable S sound. And I still have trouble with it. And that's one reason why I remain so self-conscious about my voice, because I'm always working on S sounds and also X sounds, and when they're together, it's hell on earth for me. Now, as I said, when I was initially pulled out to undergo this, nobody told me about it. I didn't know what it was about, and I complained about it to my mother repeatedly until she eventually contacted the school to find out why I had been pulled out. And knowing that I hated it so much, she eventually said, no, he's not going to do this. I'm not going to allow this any further. So that was the end of that. But it produced this self-consciousness about speaking that I probably never would have had otherwise. And so one of the consequences of that, though, is more positive than negative, in that part of what I had to do as part of the speech therapy was basically go through these sounds one after another to get used to forming an S sound. So even after I was done with that, I sort of have that in the back of my mind all the time. And it had the effect of making me aware of speaking as sound as much as meaning. And I would argue that that was probably the single most important thing to come out of the therapy, because it opened my ears and my mouth and my eyes to alternative ways of thinking about language. And so I think that's probably why I eventually became interested in acting, or at least actors, in the sense of listening to actors as much as anything else, at listening to the way they speak and the way they form words. And interestingly enough, as I said, those of you who only know me through my videos or my podcasts probably just sort of take all this in stride. I suspect that my closest friends and family in many ways might be more surprised than you, because if they think about my voice at all, they tend to think of it in relation to my wit. And in fact, a couple of my friends sort of identify me with my voice in that sense. So that I should be so self-conscious about it, this is something I've never really talked about, but it's always there. And as I said, it probably should be viewed on balance as being a positive thing, in that it did expose me to the idea of listening to language and being careful about what I say, which of course also has an even more important result in that, because I'm worried about forming the sounds, I kind of hold back from saying a lot of things. And so at a very early age, I learned the value of keeping my mouth shut. And I would insist that's not a small thing. I wish that a lot of people did have that lesson. But having said that, I don't doubt that the intentions of the people involved in all this were good. I also don't doubt that, given when this happened, this was back in the 60s, that effectively their motivation was highly conformist. And it probably was, frankly, because I was one of the smartest kids in the class. And they probably thought, well, you know, to help him in the future, in the professional career we know he's going to have, we will do what we can to correct this, and so he can move in that world without being worried about it. And the reason I resent this, even if they were right, and I kind of think they probably were, that it feels more cosmetic than anything else. And so at this point, I assume this kind of thing does not happen in schools any longer, but it definitely did instill this kind of self-consciousness and a vague sense of inferiority as a result of it, which is why I hate the sound of my voice. Now, I know that everyone hates the sound of their voice when they hear it for the first time in a recording. I'm talking about more than that, though. It's really having to listen to every sound I make, every sentence I say, trying to figure out whether or not I could have said it more effectively. However, as I said, that did at least have the benefit of opening me up to acting, whether as an actor or at least being able to speak well. And I flatter myself to think that I do speak well, and most people tend to agree. So I will close with saying that this may have been one of the earliest and most profound examples of Nietzsche's famous dictum, that which does not destroy strengthens, because I certainly, if I had had any choice originally, I never would have been involved in it. But because I had to do it, and because I've got that under my belt, or under my tongue, I guess, that it has been beneficial in the long run. So we'll leave it at that. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering why I am wearing a scarf, I'm not sick. It's just that I forgot to wear a shirt with a high collar, and so it's a little cold. So I thought I'll just wear a scarf. So anyway, hope that was all enlightening and you're not thinking I'm an idiot. But anyway, talk to you later.